Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. Hello, hello, hello. How you guys doing today?
Yes, I hope you all are having a wonderful Sunday. And as always, thank you for spending the next hour with us. And
Always.
we have quite the show for you. I'm just going to get straight into this intro. We've got quite the show for you today. Um, we're welcoming to the show Angelic Gigi Nelson, who's an accomplished speaker, genealogist, and historian. Born in Los Angeles and raised in an Army family, she spent her school years living all over the country and overseas. She obtained degrees in American history and taught college level history courses as well as related subjects. After a decade of teaching, she became a military historian with the U.S. Air Force and completed 2 deployments downrange as a combat historian. In 2017, she settled down in Washington, D.C., where her passion for genealogy became a mission. That passion led her to create the Majani Project, a nonprofit online genealogical club for Black youth. When she realized there were no books specifically to introduce Black young adults to genealogy, she wrote and published one herself. For the Culture, a genealogy handbook for the cool kids, is a labor of love with lots of pictures and activities to get youth started on their genealogical journey of connecting to their ancestors and finding strength, resilience, and self identity in their Black heritage. Welcome to the show, Angelique.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is an absolute pleasure. It's just so rare that we come across really good books that about genealogy. For a younger market. But before we get into the book, you are also a genealogist as well as being a historian. And I was just curious, what got you on your genealogical journey?
Really, I think what got me on my journey, and this may be true for a lot of people, is that as a child of Army parents, right? My dad was in the Army. We moved around a lot. So I left California. I was born in Los Angeles, and we left California when I was like 8. And the reality is that we never really went back. So I didn't grow up around cousins and grandparents and all the extended family and have that support system that a lot of people do have. I didn't have that. So I think growing up and as an adult, when I got into college, genealogy was kind of a way for me to just connect with family, with some kind of family, right? With family further back, with ancestors, and I think that was really at the root of what got me into genealogy.
Cool. Well, I mean, saying that, I'm just thinking that must have been really challenging. I take it for granted, at least being a kid growing up, hearing family stories, especially around the holiday times. You didn't have that.
None
So
of that.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, the research itself must have been really, really challenging.
it is, and it was. Just growing up without that sort of foundational identity of who I was in my family, just and not having that presented its own set of challenges. I like to make jokes about, I guess I didn't do too bad. I'm still here, but really the reality is that it's, as a Black person in America, if you don't have that kind of foundational understanding of where you come from, and if for people, there's a lot of us African Americans in the military, right? So think about all those kids who don't grow up around extended family. I'm just one of many, right? So yeah, doing the research was difficult because I there's so many pieces of my family that I didn't have relationships with. So it's today still it's hard to kind of pick up that phone and be like, hi, I know it's been 20 years, but I'm so and so's daughter from, so all that stuff. It can be challenging, but it's also really rewarding. And so that's really the focus. What genealogy did for me was kind of help me develop relationships with family that I didn't have relationships with.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to spend just a tiny snippet on that subject.
Yeah.
So, have you been now that you're back in the United States? As you said, you're a native of DC. What has that been like actually connecting with family that you had, but you're actually starting to get to know as an adult?
So actually, yeah, I just moved here to DC in 2017. So I'm still relatively new to this city. So that's it still presents some challenges. Like I said, it can be hard to kind of, have the courage to pick up the phone. It's funny because that's always the advice I'm giving to everybody else. Like, just do it, just make that call, send that email. And then but I get how challenging that can be. But at the end of the day, you have to. I try to remember that these are people that I come from. Like, this family is how I got here, and so just kind of using that as a reference point, and just being brave enough to pick up that phone and make that call, and just start talking, right? Just so I've set myself a goal of just like once a month, call somebody, right, and just start talking to them, and then as you develop those relationships, start talking about the past, and then get those ancestor stories from that side of the family.
That is great advice. Now, writing requires discipline.
Yeah.
Genealogy requires discipline. I'm a I'm a Navy brat. So, my dad was career Navy,
Uh-huh.
and my siblings and I, we joke about the fact that we grew up in a military camp
Yeah, yeah.
when we were living at home. Did you find that coming from an Army background gave you kind of focus and really kind of an ability to organize your research?
I don't know if it was so much the army background. I think my father was probably atypical. When you think about soldiers and the army and the military, my father was none of the stereotypes that you would normally, would come to mind. My dad was none of those. So I don't know that particularly had any bearing. I think what did help in terms of discipline was I got my degrees in history, and so that's a lot of research. That's a lot of writing already when you're doing a history program. So that discipline of doing all the reading, and then doing the footnotes, and so all that is my background, my academic background. So I think that's what really kind of helped me to sit in the chair, write the book, do the research for it, and all the things to get it published was that background.
Cool. So, for the culture, Genealogy Handbook for the cool kids, talk about the origin story of that project.
Wow. Yeah. So I started we launched the nonprofit, and you know how when you do something, you launch something, you have an idea of how it's going to go, right? So the way I envisioned it was that maybe we would teach some classes, and then I started thinking, well, if I'm going to teach a class, then maybe I should have a book, and that kind of goes together, right? so I started looking online and trying to find a book that I could use to teach a class, and I started searching, and I was very specific about what I was looking for. There are many, many, many books out there for children on genealogy. Many. There are many, many, many books on genealogy for Black American adults, right? But I was looking for a very specific niche book that would be a book to introduce genealogy to Black youth. And I don't like to say kids, because when you say kids, people think like 5 to 12. And this
Right.
is really for, 12 and up. So I was looking specifically for a book that targeted Black youth to introduce them to genealogy. And I start looking online, and then a week later, I'm still looking online, and then a month later, I'm still trying to find something, and I'm like, clearly there is just nothing to be found. So then I thought that presents a real challenge, because I'm kind of looking for something to use, and then I thought, you know what? Okay, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And so I thought, if there's nothing out there, then I can just write it myself. I tend to have a motto of how hard could it be, right? So, granted, if I know now, but if I knew then what I know now, I might have thought twice about that. But yeah, so that's how that got started, is just looking for something to use as a teaching tool or a guide to teach genealogy, and that's how For the Culture was born.
Cool. So, appreciating that you are not a psychologist or a counselor,
Yeah.
one of the reasons that Donnie and I were really excited to also have you on the show is, you're hearing firsthand, face to face from Black youth about family history and about genealogy. And I'm curious, what are some of the broad themes of if there's any kind of reluctance around they feel in researching their ancestry, and what some of that reluctance is about?
It's so funny, because I think sometimes we always think that kids are going to be so guarded. And what I've seen is that they are very open, they are very willing to share. they would come to, because I've done some classes, and they would come to class and tell all kinds of stuff, that they found out about it. And I'm like, in my mind, I would be thinking, do your parents know that you're telling us that? And I mean, nothing like legit crazy, but just stuff that you normally, things that they found out about their family, ancestors. And I'd be like, wow, okay. But what I found is, if you can introduce it to them in a way that makes sense to them, that they are more than willing to to start doing the work, right? And I see someone saying that genealogy grounded them as they got older, Terry. So that's awesome. That is so cool. Yeah, but back to kids, they're very willing and very open to have those conversations with. I would, encourage them to call up their grandparents, call up the oldest member of their family that they know, and just start having those conversations. And they were more than willing to do that. And so they would come back and share with the class. Like, and I would say, you don't have to say, anything if you don't want to, only if you want to. But every single time, every single person wanted to share.
That's
And
awesome.
that is phenomenal.
That's awesome. So, okay, the classes that you've had,
Yeah.
what are the ages?
They were high school.
So they were all high
Yeah,
school
all
students.
high
That's
school.
good. Now I'm asking this question because a lot of, we have this whole issue with CRT right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes you have parents that may not want to go into, when they start to realize it, they may not want to go into the fact that, I don't want my kid to know this history. How do you deal with that, or have you had that problem?
I think that being in DC kind of, at least for me, it's kind of shielded me from that, because DC is it's a special place, right? And certainly in terms of its educational system. So we have a whole gamut of different kinds of schools here. You've got charter, and then public charter. It's a whole thing. But for the most part, what I found is that, I go to a school, and I kind of, tell them what we're looking to do, and they are all on board, and they give me kind of carte blanche to teach the class, of course, within parameters of what, of some things. But for that's literally never come up ever.
That's awesome. That's good.
So earlier you were saying that sometimes it's about how you introduce the subject of genealogy to a younger person.
Yeah.
Can you just give just one example? Like just beg just one example of an approach that worked well for you.
So one of the things we really love to do is talk about, all of the traits that you have, right? Like whether you like baseball, or your favorite color is red, like all those things that make you you. I would just, we ask, like, well, where do you think that came from? So how did you get to be who you are? Like, what makes you you? And so when kids start thinking about that, they start, wondering, okay, well, why am I the way that I am? Why do I not like fish? All the things. And then we also, we talk about DNA a lot, and the traits that your genes provide, like all those things that make you you. And so the kids, I think that's one piece that kind of captures their attention, and so they have questions about that, and they want to know more. I tell them stories about, things that I learned about myself, and members of my family. For example, when I was in college, how back, I don't know if they do this now, but back when I was in college, this was many, many, many years ago. Back when I was in college, you had to take a physical education class. And so, I'm looking through the course catalog, and I don't really see anything that I want to do. And then, like, but you got to pick something. So I'm like, okay, I'll pick tennis. So I pick tennis. I go to the class the first day. We're lobbing the ball back and forth, whatever. And after the class, the coach comes up to me and says, "Are you a tennis player?" And I'm like, "No." Like, that was literally the first time I'd ever picked up a racket. And so I go home and I tell my mom, what happened, because I was that kid that lived at home and went to college. Okay. so I go home and I tell my mom, what happened. And she's like, "Your grandmother played tennis." And I was like, "What?" Like, I had never known that before. That was completely, like, newsflash, brand new news to me. So it's those kinds of things that you learn about yourself by having those conversations with your parents and with your grandparents. So I tell those stories like that to the kids, and then they go home and start asking questions. And so, yeah, it sort of starts a chain reaction.
Excellent.
Wow.
I'm really
So I
curious again.
oh go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I got the book and I haven't been able to actually read it, but I have gone through it. And one of the things that I noticed in it is that for every chapter you talk about a different country and you give all of these maps.
Yeah.
So you're like actually like teaching them a history about almost every country that you're dealing with in this. What gave you the, thought process to do that?
Yeah, so I think as I was working on my degree in history, I also got really interested in geography, right? And so fast forward to when I was writing the book, and I just started thinking about the fact that our education system, and that's a whole other show, a whole other 50 shows probably about our education system, but but I just started thinking about the fact that it is so Eurocentric, right? We all have to learn when we're in school the countries in Europe, the capitals in Europe, all the things about Europe. And we never, ever, ever really learn anything about Africa, right? We never even really learned that there are so many different Black populations all over the planet. I was in grad school before I really knew that there were Black people in South America. And I find that terrifying. Like, how did I get to be that old before I recognize that? But it's because of the way, it's because of our education system, and it's because of the way the media portrays different countries. Back in the day, when you would see a commercial about the Bahamas or about Brazil, did they ever have Black people in those commercials?
Mm-mm.
No.
No. You only
Mm,
so why would you think that there were Black people there if you never saw it, right? And so as I was writing the book, I was like, you know what? I'm already a geography nerd. And so I thought, I'm going to put every single country, every single capital of that country, and every single Black population. So I did it, for all the provinces in Canada, all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in South America and in Africa. So everywhere that basically the African diaspora and Africa. So you can find those that first chapter is all about those. Well, the first couple chapters are all about those specific places. And so I put that in there because I'm like, I don't want any, as much as I could possibly help it, I don't want anybody else to have to wait till grad school to learn that there are Black people all over the place.
literally all
Well, when she
over the
oh
place.
exactly, and what she said about being a genealogy nerd, I don't know, a geography nerd. I don't know if you guys can see this,
Yes,
but
again.
she literally put it in the book. Expert tip: geography is important, not just for genealogy. So she had to let you know. Yeah, that part. I love
That
it.
part.
I
Because
Okay.
love it.
it matters, right? Because if we never see ourselves represented, all we ever see are Eurocentric visuals, right? Then you get this sense that we're not there. It's like we're just erased, and that's so not the case. And so anything I can do to kind of promote the fact that we are everywhere, then that's what I'm going to do.
Mhm. Well, that is why we are so keen, and it's our mission every Black History Month, while we pay our respect to the nationally known figures and forefathers and mothers. We always like talking about new people, new names, and introducing new narratives kind of into the national consciousness. So while we're on the topic of the book, can you talk about the different types of learning content in the book? Because it's not just all words and reading.
Right, right. So I recognize that, this is the 21st century, and people, not just kids, I can't even say it's kids anymore, but people in general, many people are visual learners. And so we wanted to make sure that there's, something for everybody. So it's definitely not a textbook. There is plenty of, there's tables, there's graphs, there's charts, there's images, all the things. But as far as how the book, sort of the breakdown of the book is, the first part is, not going to lie, the first part is about the geography, right? Well, actually, let me back up for a second, because the first thing that we talk about really is sort of the genesis of Black genealogy. So it
Right.
starts off actually with a little bit of a narrative about Alex Haley and roots, and then it goes from there into the geography section, and then from that it goes into like tips on how to actually do genealogy. So just all the things, just to start, just a simple start of how to start a genealogy project, right? Because remember, this is really just, it's a book for beginners. It's a book just to introduce people to genealogy. It's not like some huge hard, some, textbook about, all the hard stuff about genealogy. This is just to get people interested, right? And then it goes into, there's a huge section in the back that has resources, because a lot of times people think about genealogy like, oh, everything you have to pay for anything if you want to do research, like everything is like a paid subscription, and that is absolutely not the case. There are so many free resources available for genealogists. So there's a section, I think the first section in the resource section is several pages of free resources for actual African American websites that you can go to and to do research in that are free. And then it goes into more general genealogy sites, and then it kind of goes from there. There's a section on the Caribbean, because I didn't want to leave out, our Caribbean brothers and sisters. And I want to say there's a section too for Canadians as well. So
Canadian, it
yeah,
is.
yeah. So yeah. And so then after that, there's a section, there's about 18 to 20 activities that kids can do. So like actual practical activities, for those days when maybe you can't go outside. So everything from just, having or creating like a collage of family photos. There's a really neat activity. One of my favorites is if you find a picture of a relative, right? Somebody from, either the 70s or even further back, and then you recreate that photo. So, whatever, outfit that they're wearing, or maybe there's somebody playing a guitar or something. And so you take a picture of yourself, in sort of a similar outfit playing a guitar, and then, put those pictures side by side and post them and just see, that family resemblance. That's a really cool activity that I really like. And those are fun. So yeah, so the book is divided up into those kinds of sections where it's a little bit of the history. I can't believe I almost forgot to talk about the history. But yeah,
We
so
would have came back to it.
it's gonna come back. It will come back. So I don't, and that's why it was so important for me to write a book specifically for Black youth, because our history is so intertwined with our genealogy, right? And you can't really talk about genealogy without talking a little bit about history. And so there's a little section. It's not a history book, I promise. I was tempted, but I held myself back. But there's a little bit about just African American history, just some real quick kind of snapshots. The goal of the history section is really to interest you in learning more about history. So I'm hoping that as you read the history parts, that you'll go online or go to your local library and dig out more, because we have such a rich history, and it's been erased for so long. And so it was important to me to at least hopefully spark some interest by putting just some different pieces of our history in the front. But again, I promise it's a very small section. It's nothing crazy. I didn't go overboard. I promise. At least I
She
don't think
really didn't. She didn't.
I
Shelly
wanted to.
Murphy. Shelly Murphy agrees. She says it's an excellent book. She shared it with a friend at IAAM, and it is. It really
Hey,
is. I
thank
mean, like
you.
I said, I haven't read it, but going through it and being able to just look at the different things that you're offering in it is just amazing.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, thank
you're
you.
So,
I
covering
appreciate that.
everything from, like you said, genealogy beginnings for roots for most African Americans. That's what kind of kicked it off. You're covering everywhere that Black people live and things. You're covering countries, their capitals. I mean, y'all think I'm playing, I'm really not. I'm not joking. Like, look at this. This is like a whole. This is for South America, and she literally
mm,
has all of the flags, the names of the countries, the names of the capitals, the population of African Americans there. It's an excellent resource book for it's historic. It is a history book without it being a history book. I'm gonna say that.
well,
Because it's teaching a history that we don't know. So
true,
It's
yeah.
a secret
true.
history. All
Um,
right.
I guess I would classify it as a gateway book. It's an excellent gateway book into both genealogy and history. And I'm sticking with, I guess, getting young people, and let's face it, I think even adults need to kind of think
Absolutely,
along
absolutely.
these lines. Is, I'm just curious if with your book out there and with these conversations starting, will younger people start making that mental connection between being here in the United States as opposed to being Black in Canada, in the Caribbean, Central America, Mexico, Latin America, South America, and understanding we are all one people who are also connected to Africa?
My
That's
bad,
right.
Brian. I got distracted because my aunt was on and I saw her comment and I got a smidge distracted. Can you please repeat that question? And I will
Okay,
not
no,
focus
no,
on that. Okay.
It
not a
was more of
problem.
a comment.
I'm trying to avoid the phrase Pan Africanism, but I think that books like yours,
Yeah.
and I was just looking to get your input. Books like yours, and when these discussions are happening, and if other books kind of pop out along the same lines, getting younger readers, and I said even adults, we kind of need to reprogram our brains to actually see themselves as part of a greater African diaspora, to know that we're connected to people in the Caribbean, Mexico, Latin America, South America, Canada, Africa.
Yes and yes, and I'm a fan of that word Pan African. I recognize that maybe it's kind of older and maybe it's fallen out of favor. I don't know, but I think it speaks to what it is, which is people of African descent, right? People, whether they are actually in Africa or are in the diaspora, it's all of us, people of African descent. And so yeah, the goal is to sort of demystify the fact that there are black people everywhere and to sort of see us all as one of the things I've learned that for me that I've learned that's come out of writing this book and just talking to different people is, and I didn't realize it before, but there in many places there's a very sort of deep divide between Africans and African Americans. And which is, I found it odd because in a place like DC where I live, there are huge African populations here. And of course, there's a huge African American populations, but it's like the two don't really mix. Even in the schools, from what I've, and this is sort of secondhand because obviously I'm a little old to be in school, but I've heard people say, the kids are like the Africans sit on one side, the African Americans on another, and so there's all these sort of misunderstandings culturally between the adults and the kids, and so that's part of what this whole movement is about for me, is to kind of bridge that divide. Donnie, I'm not sure if I mentioned it to you, but I was able to go to Ghana a couple years ago, and that trip was just life changing in so many different ways. But one of the things that I recognized is again back to that sort of dominant Eurocentric narrative of it's fine as a woman to go, I can hop a plane and go to Brussels and it's like not a big deal. But it's like when it comes to any country in Africa, it's like, oh, well, you better be careful. You don't know what's going to happen there and it might be dangerous. And there's this whole narrative around Africa and countries in Africa. And it's just a lot of it's just nonsense. And I'm not saying that there's not, that you don't need to be careful. Of course you do. You need to be careful anywhere you are. But the prevailing narrative that it's just so much more dangerous and that you can't do it because you're a woman or you're this or that and it's just going to be so problematic and all of that is just nonsense. I got off the plane and it was fine, like, and just being there, if you've never been to an African country, I'm telling you now, you need to go. There's nothing like being in a place where everybody looks like you. It's a whole vibe for real.
Wow.
Have
I'm not, that's wow. I want to go. I definitely want to go. We already had somebody who just placed their order. Linda Johnson. She says I
Thank you,
placed my
Linda.
order and will receive it on Thursday. So
And thank you for your
it's
support, Linda.
it's a very very good book. It
Thank
is
you.
very very well written.
And before I forget, I do want to shout out Shelly Murphy. I saw your comments. Thank you. Shelly Murphy is like old school in the game. She's been doing this for a minute, and she's one of my idols. She's like one of my genealogy idols. So I just wanted to shout out and say thank you for your support. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
I
you
think
just
she's
made.
everybody's idol.
Yeah.
I think you just made Dr. Murphy blush. So one of the things that I hope that this book will do, if it's not doing it already, is destroying that myth that our people cannot get past the 1870 census. That is something that Donnie and I, through this show, try to stamp out of existence. And hopefully, with your work reaching a younger generation of genealogists, we can eradicate that once and for all.
Yes, and yes. I just had that. I have that conversation. I'm sure, like as you two do, being a genealogist, you have that conversation often, right? And so, yeah, I'm just that part of it to me goes back to again the narrative that first of all that genealogy, and I'm going back for a minute here, but that prevailing narrative of genealogy only being sort of in the province of white people, right? To me, genealogy for many years was a lot like tennis and golf, like it was only something that white people did, right? Until, as we all know, folks came along and proved that not to be the case. And genealogy was kind of the same thing. So as we got into it, it was like, well, you can only do so much research because you're going to come up against, this whole 1870. And for those, and I know I'm probably like preaching to the choir here, but for anyone who's on here who doesn't know what the whole 1870 brick wall is, that's a reference to the fact that 1870 was the very first year that African Americans were counted in the census, right? Like names, like information, actual in the census. And 1870 was the first year for that because, of course, it was the first, 1870 was the first census taken after the Civil War. So the prevailing
Enslaved
there,
say enslaved because free
enslaved
people
Africans.
come
Yes, yes,
were
fair
born
enough.
in 1850.
Fair
Yeah.
point. Yes, for previously enslaved African Americans, that was the first year that they were named in the census. So yeah, that prevailing narrative was that if you that was as far back as you were going to go, and sucks for you because that's all there was. And then what's come out in the last 20 to 30 years, and more recently, is that there are so many different pieces and kinds of genealogical information that no one ever just actually recognized as being useful for Black genealogists. And so there's records that go back, and I'm not saying that they're like super extensive, but there are record sets and record collections, things like bills of sale, things like inventories. So all these pieces of information that are available. The what am the help me out here. The Freedmen's Bureau records, all those things, right? So there are all these record
Okay.
sets now that are available that can help you go back a little bit further. You have to recognize that it may not look like a traditional, genealogical record, but it's still got, vast pieces of information in it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I wanted to put this up here because I wanted to wait until she finished saying what she was saying. Shelly responded to you. And she says, I am blushing. Thank you. I gifted the book to my niece and nephew. Big supporter of this. Thank you. So I just wanted that, but I didn't want to get you to lose your
Because
because
I get distracted easily, clearly, right?
no, but see, I get it when you meet somebody or you're able to talk to someone that you look up to. I mean, I had to explain that to Melvin because Melvin was my first genealogist genealogy mentor,
Hmm.
celebrity mentor. That's what I called him. I called him my genealogy celebrity mentor. And he just looked at me cross-eyed when but he was because I saw him on Who Do You Think You Are? So I was like, oh my God, I'm a part of a group with the Melvin Collier. So I get how you felt. I could tell, I could feel your feeling when it comes to Dr. Murphy.
For
And
sure.
so I wanted to put that up there without you losing it
Because
a little bit.
I really might have. I might have just fell out for real. That's a real possibility.
So I'd like to tease out something a little bit more. So you actually do work in schools, if I understand correctly. So if
I have done that.
okay, so if I was a teacher and I wanted to introduce this topic into my classroom, how would I go about doing that? And what kind of a day would that look like?
So there's so many different ways and models that you can use. The one that we've done the most is where the school let us basically sort of embed with a class. And so we had a day each week for a semester. And so that was a day that the regular teacher could do, whatever they needed to do. And so I would have that hour each week to talk. So I just sort of broke it up into 10 different discussions. Like one week we talked about, and the other really cool thing that we were able to do, because we do live in DC and this is such a genealogy rich environment, is we were able to take the kids on a lot of different field trips.
Oh,
So, we took them to Library of Congress. We actually took them to the Spin Garn, the Howard University archives. So just to let them know that there are so many different kinds of record sets. And really quick, back to what you were saying, Danya, about that. Think about university archives. I mean, there are so many, especially HBCU archives. When it comes to doing research on us, those are great resources. So don't forget those as you do your research. But back to the school program. So yeah, so we just kind of broke it up into ten sessions, and just created some programming around that. Showed a few films, and then there was something else I was about to say about that. What else? What else? So whatever it was, it escaped me. But anyway, but that was pretty much how we did that. Was just like, this is what it was. One of the things that we're working on now is because obviously we can't be in every school, either in the city, or we want this to be something that goes across the country. But what we're really promoting now is the idea of cultural sensitivity as it relates to genealogy, because what we recognize is a lot of schools actually do teach genealogy in the classroom, whether it's just a 1 day module or a week or whatever. A lot of schools are doing that. The problem is that they're not always particularly culturally sensitive, and so you get things like, as it relates to the Black students in the class, it's like, oh well, sucks for you. You can only go so far, that kind of thing. And so we're
yeah.
really one of our goals is to really educate educators and just let them, make them aware of all of the different resources that are available to the Black genealogist.
Now,
So
the other thing that impresses me immensely about your work is you broach the subject of genetic genealogy and DNA with younger people. Um, I sometimes have to take a deep breath just doing that with adults. I know Danya does too. So we're both really impressed. But what did the younger people actually make of the whole DNA thing?
Younger people, they don't have an issue with it. It's funny because a lot of the resistance comes from old, and understandably. So it's not like I don't understand it, because I do, and we can talk about that more. But when it comes to young people, half the class, my first class that I taught, half of them had already done a DNA test.
Oh,
mm,
cool.
And that shocked me. Like, it shocked the pants off. I was like, what? Like, I couldn't believe it. They're like, yeah, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, they just, like, they're on it, right? So you don't really come up against the kind of resistance that you would assume would be there. And and granted, probably maybe the more as we get into other more classrooms, we may come up against different types of, if people aren't as familiar with them. But it doesn't seem to really be like a thing the way that it kind of used to be, not even 20 years ago.
So, well, Danya, I keyed up your question.
because you did that, now it's gone. Oh, the DNA.
Do,
So, with that being said, he did cue up my question. Let's talk about what happened in DC last year and how it's actually making you do a movement towards getting better with covering African Americans and DNA. What
yeah.
happened last year that
uh,
made you move forward?
Actually, a couple things happened last year. I'm going to talk about the second thing first, because it I knew about the first thing after the second thing happened. Okay, now that I've set that stage. So I had an opportunity to go do a presentation about genealogy and about DNA testing in Atlanta. There was a lady there who was hosting an event, and the event was for missing persons. Her story, God bless her, her story was that her baby had been kidnapped as an infant, and it's been 44 years now, and the child was never found. And the studies show that generally people who kidnap babies want to raise them. So the odds are very good that he's alive as an adult and just doesn't recognize or realize that he may have been kidnapped as a child, as a baby. As we all know, people do DNA tests for a lot of different reasons. And so her event was to encourage more Black people to do DNA tests in the event that, someone that you can find that missed connection. If her adult son has done a DNA test and, the ancestry, all the databases will match you with relatives. So there's a possibility of being able to find that missing family. And so that's what that event was for. When I got back from that event, I found out that DC had actually done what they call a DNA drive. They did the DNA drive in October of last year, but they held it at Catholic University. And I never heard about it. I don't know to this. I still haven't met anybody who actually knew about it. But so that's one piece. And then the reality too is that our community as African Americans, we rarely get the sort of publicity for our missing adults and children that white people get. That's the reality. And so, in a city that's has a huge Black population, I found it really incredible that they would host an event like that at a. And granted, I mean, this is not a knock against Catholic University, but it just seemed it wasn't very inclusive. Let me put it that way. And
It was
so,
a it's a predominantly white institution. Catholic University is a predominantly white institution. Yes.
right, right. And I understand they have, deep ties to different, agencies. They've got like a whole whatever. Anyway, the point is, it was not particularly inclusive. And so we looked at that as an opportunity to say, hey, maybe if we can partner with the city, specifically the Office of the Medical Examiner, that we could host a DNA drive in Southeast, which is where a huge part of the Black population in DC lives, is in Southeast, east of the river, if you will. And so that's something that we're hoping to make happen for this year, and being able to publicize it to African Americans, not just in DC but also PG County. We know Ward 9, if you will. So yeah, and just make it super inclusive, and hopefully get people out and just kind of educate people about the benefits of taking DNA tests, not just for the missing persons piece, and God bless you if you fall into that category, if you know people who have missing people in their family, but also obviously for ancestry, genealogical purposes, right? And then the middle piece of that is for medical research purposes. Really quick, because I don't want to take up all y'all's time, but for the as far as the medical research piece, we know that there's a lot of reason why people are not particularly or they may not be particularly interested in providing DNA to the medical establishment, because we all know the story of Henrietta Lacks, the Tuskegee experiment, all those things where our our DNA, or our whatever the parts of our bodies that were being used in ways that we did not condone and did not approve of. And so we recognize all that. But the reality, fast forward to 2024, it's only been in the past year. I don't know if you guys saw this in the news, but it was actually just not that long ago that they found a possible cure for sickle cell anemia. All of us know that sickle cell is endemic to the African American population. We all know that. We all probably know someone who has it, right? The fact
I
that
have
it's
to train.
taken, right? The fact that it's taken this long for a possible cure is just ridiculous.
Mhm.
It should have been that should have happened 60 years ago. But a lot of it is because the medical community does not have a lot of representative DNA samples from Black people, and sickle cell specifically is a genetic disease. So if there's not a huge sample, there's nothing to work with. And so we just want to educate people about the reasons for doing DNA tests and what that DNA can be used for. So we're hoping to put together an event this year that is much more inclusive and touches on all those pieces.
Okay. Family alert. Your Uncle Philip and
Hi,
can't
Uncle
listen.
Philip. Hi, Aunt Sue. Love you guys.
I just wanted to alert you. So no, but
We represent.
that's actually very awesome that you're getting involved in something like that. And I'm excited about it as well to help you with that as much as I can here in this area, because our kids don't know. Our people don't know or really understand the whole DNA track. All I think we were talking about it, in the green room, how our families, some people didn't want to test. I know you and Brian were talking about it, and they were very, both of your families were like, oh yeah, I'll test. Well, I didn't get to respond because I was doing some stuff, but my family ain't open to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My family is just not, they're not open to it, and they're not open to it for several different reasons. And yeah, they're just
Yeah.
not open to it.
Yeah.
So
And
you got people.
understandably.
No, it's not. And I mean, I'm not going to sit up here and say that it's understandable because of that reason that you guys pointed out in the green room. Once one person does it, we gonna find out anyway. And because my mom, it's my mother's DNA. So my mother done pulled in, I don't know how many nieces and nephews that don't nobody know, great nieces and nephews that people may not know about. It's just, it's everything. So
Yeah.
it's not like you're gonna hide it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it can't be hidden.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once it's done, it's done. And I've done it, my mom done it, my mom has done it, my sister, my kids, everybody they've participated. They have participated. And I have one aunt who has about, even though she's gone, I kind of gave them accolades on Facebook because about 10 of her descendants have taken this test. And it's so important
It is.
because where my DNA may not connect to you, it may connect to somebody else, one of them. And then
Yeah.
that lets me know, yeah, okay, you are related. We just got to figure out where it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and what
And
one thing that people probably don't understand too about DNA, just in general, not the test, but just how DNA works, is Danya, if you and I could be sisters, right? If we both take a DNA test, we're not going to have the same percentages of ethnicity. So let's for example, right? We're sisters and we both have, maybe some of our DNA is from, Nigeria and some of it's from Senegal. You could have a 17% from Nigeria and a 10% from Senegal. I could have a 27% from Nigeria and a 55% from Senegal. So DNA is the luck of the draw. Everybody, siblings, I have, 5 siblings, and we all have different percentages of ethnicities in us because it's like playing dice. It's literally like playing dice, and you don't know what you're
that's
gonna get.
exact. It's a crapshoot. That's
Exactly.
exactly what it is. It's
Exactly.
a crapshoot. You
Yeah.
never know what you're gonna toss out when you do DNA, and
Yeah.
it's crazy. But I want to ask you this question because we are running out of time, and I have to ask it.
Yeah.
Um, what what kind of responses are you getting from the book, because it really is more so based on African American research and not necessarily European research, because it's more based on that. That's what it's based on. You can tell by the colors of the flag and behind the kids standing there.
All that was
But
extremely intentional. Absolutely. And
yeah,
you have to make a decision about who your market is going to be, like who you're writing for. And so that's what I did. And I wanted it to be really clear that this is for, by us, for us, right? So as far as their response, it's been really good. Or let's put it, if it has been bad, no one's told me yet. But most people are really appreciative of it. White people buy it. A lot of so black and white people have bought it, and the response has been so far has been pretty positive.
that's great. That is awesome. I'm so proud of you in this book because it just definitely opens up doors to our children and just letting them know, hey, this is a way for you guys to learn more about your family. And you guys, at the back of the book, how we normally have our family group sheets. Listen to some of the things that she has down for her family group sheet. She has that basic, the parent's name and the city and state and so on and so forth. But then she says, were they a member of any clubs? Did they have any hobbies? Did the family attend a church? What church? So you're starting to ask, like, I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to use this for some of my own stuff. So it'll help me get, it's so great.
Well,
It's
that's
really great.
it's really about creating a real family history. Genealogy is that's why I don't really like using the word genealogy, because the true definition of genealogy is kind of like the facts, right? The dates, the just the basic information. It's those stories, it's those that information that puts the flesh on the bones, and that's what family history is. It tells the story. So it talks about, what jobs, your parents had when they were teenagers. It talks about what schools they went to or where they graduated or the clubs they were in or the sports that they were involved in. Those are the kinds of stories that create a whole family, an actual family history. And so that's why I included that. There's a place back there for people to put down family recipes. So yeah, there's a lot in there for youth and adults for sure.
Mhm. And again, just in the final minutes of the show, the way that you've worked history, and I just absolutely love, because before I did genealogy, reading about American history and looking at the American historical timeline, I didn't have any names to associate with any of those periods of time.
Excuse
Now that I've researched some of my enslaved lines all the way back to the 1600s, and my free people of color all the way back to the 1600s, now when they're talking about the stock market crash of 1828, I'm like, oh, that's when so and so was alive, and this person did this, and this person did that, and it really kind of grounds me in that kind of American identity. And again, to give that gift to a younger generation of Black kids,
Yeah.
it's priceless. It
Thank
really
you.
is priceless.
And that what you said, I love what you just said, because doing your genealogy, doing family history, it makes American history come alive. So things that,
me.
most of us, most in general, don't, you wouldn't really care about. But when you understand how it affected your family, right? Whether it's the GI Bill from World War II, or whether it's the Homesteading Act of the 1800s, how those things, how your family sort of intersected with American policy, that helps you understand American history in a different way because it's much more personal. And I'll just sort of leave on this note, which is that it's, to me, family history is fundamental. It's foundational. There are studies that have proven that people who know and understand their family history are more successful overall in any field. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's neuroscience or being a mechanic. When you understand who you are and where you come from, you move differently in the world. You show up differently because you have that foundation, you have that identity. And so that's what we've really tried to provide in this book, is just sort of a baseline for how, if you don't already have that in your family, because a lot of us don't sit around and tell stories about the past and the ancestors, and for good reason. Many of our ancestors were, enslaved, and that's a hard truth. And so, but I think by only focusing on that particular story, we've lost fact, and we've lost sight of the joy and the resilience and the strength that our ancestors did have, and we know they had that because we're all here, right? And so the focus of the book, the focus of the Majani Project, the goal of all of it is to just sort of reclaim that narrative and focus on the strength and those stories of strength and joy and resilience. So as you do your family history, I'm not saying that you can't talk about, or and hopefully you have people you can talk about the hard stuff with, but also focus on the good stuff and just create that foundation.
And I'm going to borrow from Rick Murphy, who on a webinar that was hosted by Dr. Shelley Murphy yesterday said something that still blows my mind. I know it, but until he said it the way he said it, it just blew my mind. Reminding ourselves in our younger generations that our Black ancestors were also the founding mothers and fathers of this nation.
Yes, they
Absolutely.
were.
Absolutely.
Family alert. Family alert. And this is a great one.
Y'all, my
This is
family.
a great one. This is Kelly 03. I'm loving this. I've been interested in genealogy for a long time. I definitely want to learn more. Great job, cousin Angelique. She
That's my
sounds young. So
That's my
you got
cousin
somebody.
Kelly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you got somebody you can, you already had somebody to pass that work on down to. That is
Kelly, be
awesome.
careful what you ask for because I got your number. I'll be calling you every day now talking about. So, what's up?
So I just want to thank you again for coming on the show and just talking with us and just sharing all of this great information and sharing all of this awesome knowledge and sharing your book with us. Again, the book is called For the Culture, a genealogy handbook for the cool kids. You can find more information about excuse me, about Angelique at her website at www.manaja.
Mm-mm.
Am I spelling it right?
There you go.
MAJANI.org. There it is right there. So next week, guys, we're actually, and this show that we're going to be talking about next week was already on the Today Show earlier this week. It's talking about the William Bray School initiative. And the William Bray School was done back in 1760, and it was a school that was set up for African American enslaved children and free people of color so that they could learn to read and write. And they had I think at the time, if I read correctly, it was only one teacher, and she just kind of helped all these hundreds of kids, maybe even thousands of Black children to learn how to read. So we're going to be talking with Elizabeth Drimbus next week about that particular show. So make sure you check in, make sure you check us out. Angelique, again, it was awesome to have you. Please don't leave when we go, as we're going out. Um, Great show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, both Danya and Brian. It was really my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely pleasure to have you here. And thank you again for dropping your knowledge. And as always, thank you everyone who's tuned in for spending this last hour with us, however you've done it. And as always, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And until next week, Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. I'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.